What happens when Hollywood chases the future and loses the audience completely? These films promise new worlds, bold ideas, and unforgettable visions. But something went wrong. Stories collapsed, ambition spiraled out of control, and audiences walked away. Today, we are uncovering 15 sci-fi disasters from the 1970s that studios quietly buried. Some were too strange, some were too early, and some simply failed when it mattered most. Number 15, The Visitor, 1979. Something feels wrong from the very first frame. Not broken, not cheap, just wrong in a way audiences could not explain. The Visitor arrived with ambition that bordered on madness. The film blended cosmic mythology with psychological horror. A child becomes the center of a supernatural battle between good and evil forces. On paper, it sounds bold. On screen, it became chaos. The production tried to mimic the spiritual weight of The Exorcist and the spectacle of Star Wars, but instead of clarity, it delivered confusion. Scenes jump without logic. Characters appear without explanation. The narrative feels like a puzzle, missing half its pieces. Audiences walked in expecting a gripping science fiction experience. What they got was a disorienting experiment that refused to hold their hand. Critics were even harsher. Many described it as incomprehensible. Some called it unintentionally surreal. Financially, it collapsed almost instantly. Distribution was weak. Marketing failed to explain what the film actually was. The studio quietly pulled back support as ticket sales faded within weeks. And that is what makes it fascinating. Not just a failure, but a film that felt like it was made from fragments of better ideas stitched together without discipline. Over time, it gained a strange cult following. Viewers began to appreciate its bizarre tone and fearless weirdness, but in 1979, none of that mattered. Because in that moment, The Visitor was not seen as visionary. It was seen as a mistake Hollywood did not want to talk about. Number 14, Message from Space, 1978. Here is where imitation turns into desperation. Message from Space was Japan's direct attempt to capture the lightning created by Star Wars. Bigger battles, colorful heroes, a cosmic rebellion story. Everything looked familiar, too familiar. The film throws viewers into a galaxy under siege. A group of warriors must answer a mystical call to save a dying empire. It sounds epic. But the execution lacks the emotional core that made Star Wars resonate. Instead of wonder, there is imitation. Instead of tension, there is noise. Visually, the film struggles to match its ambition. Effects feel uneven. Action sequences lack weight. The pacing rushes from one set piece to another without giving the audience time to care. Internationally, the response was cold. Western audiences dismissed it as a knockoff. Critics pointed out its lack of originality. Even fans of space opera found it difficult to stay engaged. Box office performance reflected that rejection. The film failed to break through in major markets. Distribution deals weakened. Studios quickly moved on. What makes this collapse more painful is timing. Released so close to Star Wars, it never had a chance to define itself. It existed in the shadow of something far more polished and emotionally powerful. And Hollywood noticed, because Message from Space became a warning. Not every success can be copied, and sometimes chasing a trend only exposes how far behind you really are. Number 13, Quintet, 1979. The silence in this film is not peaceful, it is suffocating. Quintet was directed by Robert Altman, a filmmaker known for layered storytelling and sharp human observation. But this time, he stepped into a frozen future, where emotion itself feels buried under ice. The premise is deceptively simple. The world is locked in an endless winter. Civilization has collapsed into isolated pockets of survivors. In this bleak landscape, a deadly board game called Quintet becomes the center of existence. Lose the game, and you lose your life. It sounds like a powerful metaphor, a commentary on society turning survival into entertainment, but the execution left audiences confused and disconnected. The pacing moves at a glacial speed. Dialogue is sparse. Characters feel distant as if they exist behind a wall of frost. Even Paul Newman, a performer known for magnetic presence, seems restrained by the film's cold atmosphere. Visually, the film is striking. Frosted lenses create a hazy, dreamlike look. Every frame feels like it is trapped in a dying world, But that beauty comes at a cost. The narrative becomes harder to follow. The emotional stakes fade into abstraction. Critics were divided but often harsh. Many called it pretentious. Others admitted it had ambition but no clarity. Audiences struggled even more. The lack of traditional storytelling left theaters quiet and empty. Financially, it underperformed. The studio expected something bold, yet accessible. Instead, they received a film that felt like an art experiment disguised as science fiction. And so, Quintet faded quickly. Not because it lacked vision, but because it forgot that even the coldest worlds need a human heartbeat to survive. Number 12, Capricorn One, 1977. This one did not fail loudly. It slipped through quietly, which made it even more dangerous. Capricorn One arrived with a concept that should have exploded at the box office. A fake Mars landing. A government willing to stage the greatest lie in human history. The kind of idea that feels instantly gripping. The film follows astronauts who are pulled from a real mission and forced to participate in a staged broadcast. The public believes humanity has reached Mars. In reality, it is all a carefully constructed illusion filmed in the desert. What makes this story unsettling is how believable it feels. The manipulation of media, the control of information, the quiet elimination of anyone who gets too close to the truth. On paper, it had everything. Suspense, paranoia, relevance, but execution became its weakness. The pacing struggles to maintain tension. Scenes that should feel explosive stretch too long. Emotional urgency fades between sequences. Even strong performances fail to elevate the material into something unforgettable. Critics acknowledged the concept, but questioned the delivery. Some praised its ambition. Many felt it never reached its full potential. At the box office, it performed below expectations. Not a complete disaster. But far from the success the studio anticipated given its timely premise. And then, something interesting happened. Over time, the film gained attention as conspiracy culture grew. Its ideas began to resonate more with modern audiences. The paranoia it hinted at started to feel real. But in 1977, none of that saved it. Because at release, Capricorn One was not seen as prophetic. It was seen as a missed opportunity Hollywood quickly moved past. Number 11, Journey to the Far Side of the Sun. 1970. It begins with wonder. A mirror Earth. A perfect duplicate hidden on the far side of the sun. The kind of idea that instantly captures the imagination. Journey to the Far Side of the Sun promised a discovery that could redefine reality itself. Astronauts travel across space only to uncover a world that reflects our own but with unsettling differences. It is a concept filled with mystery and existential dread. The first half builds that intrigue carefully. There is tension in the unknown. There is beauty in the exploration. The production design feels grounded. The science is presented with a seriousness that invites the audience to believe. But then something shifts. The narrative struggles to maintain its momentum. The mystery becomes repetitive instead of escalating. Characters react but rarely evolve. Emotional stakes remain distant. The deeper implications of a mirrored world are never fully explored. And then comes the ending. Abrupt, disorienting, unsatisfying. Audiences left theaters confused rather than amazed. The promise of a mind-bending revelation collapsed into a conclusion that felt incomplete. Critics echoed that frustration. Many praised the concept but criticized the execution. The film was seen as a missed opportunity rather than a bold achievement. Financially, it failed to justify its scale. Marketing leaned heavily on the mystery but could not prepare viewers for the underwhelming payoff. Word of mouth weakened quickly. The studio moved on without looking back. Because in Hollywood, a great idea is never enough. And Journey to the Far Side of the Sun proved that even the most fascinating premise can disappear if the ending fails to land. Number 10. The Neptune Factor, 1973. Depth can be terrifying, but here it became exhausting. The Neptune Factor attempted to push science fiction into the ocean's darkest corners. A deep sea rescue mission. A crew trapped beneath crushing pressure. A race against time in an environment where one mistake means instant death. It had the ingredients for a gripping survival story. Claustrophobic settings, constant danger, the unknown lurking in the depths. But the execution drained all urgency. The pacing moves slowly. not in a deliberate, suspenseful way, in a way that feels heavy and repetitive. Scenes stretch without adding tension. Dialogue circles around the same ideas without progress. Even the technology meant to impress begins to feel limiting. The underwater visuals lack variety. The sense of scale disappears. Instead of feeling trapped in a vast ocean, the characters seem confined within a small, repetitive space. Critics were quick to point out these flaws. Many described the film as dull despite its premise. Others noted that it lacked the excitement audiences expected from a science fiction adventure. At the box office, the response was equally cold. Interest faded quickly. The film struggled to hold attention even during its initial run. The studio did not attempt to revive it. No major re-release, no strong promotional push afterward. It simply sank. And that is the tragedy. Because a story about survival under pressure should feel intense. It should grip the audience with every moment. Instead, the Neptune Factor drifted into obscurity. A film lost not in the depths of the ocean, but in the silence of audience indifference. Number 9. The Final Program, 1973. The danger with intelligence is not ignorance, it is excess. And this film drowns in it. The Final Program arrives with a premise that feels ahead of its time. A brilliant scientist leaves behind a mysterious legacy. His brother begins a journey that spirals into genetic experimentation, identity manipulation, and the unsettling idea of merging human consciousness. It is not just science fiction, it is philosophy wrapped in chaos. But from the moment the story begins to unfold, something fractures. The narrative refuses to anchor itself. Scenes feel disconnected, almost like fragments of a larger story that was never fully assembled. Characters drift through events instead of driving them. The audience is left trying to piece together meaning from sequences that seem deliberately abstract. There is ambition here. You can feel it in every frame. The film wants to explore the boundaries of identity and evolution. It wants to challenge the viewer, but it forgets something crucial. See, challenge without clarity becomes alienation. Critics at the time were not forgiving. Many dismissed it as confusing and self-indulgent. Others acknowledged its intellectual depth but questioned whether it translated into effective storytelling. Audiences reacted even more strongly. They disengaged. The emotional connection never forms. The ideas remain distant instead of immersive. Financially, the film collapsed under its own weight. Marketing struggled to define what it was selling. Was it a thriller? A philosophical drama? A surreal experiment? The answer seemed to be all of them, and none of them at once. And so it faded quickly. Not because it lacked intelligence, but because it demanded too much without offering a clear path through its own complexity. In the end, the Final Program did not fail for being too strange. It failed for forgetting that even the most advanced ideas still need a story that people can follow. Number 8. The Ultimate Warrior, 1975. The world has ended. But instead of fear, what remains is emptiness. The Ultimate Warrior places us in a future where civilization has collapsed into isolated communities struggling for survival. Resources are scarce, trust is non-existent, and strength becomes the only currency that matters. At the center of this broken world stands a lone warrior, played by Yul Brynner, a figure meant to embody resilience and authority. The setup feels promising, a post-apocalyptic landscape where every decision carries weight, a story about survival against impossible odds, a chance to explore what humanity becomes when structure disappears. But the execution strips away urgency. The pacing drifts instead of driving forward. Conflicts emerge without escalation. Moments that should feel intense arrive without impact. Even the central character, who should command attention, feels distant from the world he inhabits. The environment itself lacks depth. Instead of a fully realized future, the world feels sparse and underdeveloped. Locations repeat, visual variety fades. The sense of danger never fully materializes because the stakes are not reinforced through action or consequence. Critics were quick to point out these weaknesses. Many described the film as lifeless despite its violent setting. Others noted that it lacked the energy needed to sustain a survival narrative. Audiences responded with indifference. There was no emotional hook to keep them invested. At the box office, the film failed to gain traction. It arrived without momentum and disappeared just as quickly. The studio did not attempt to build it into something larger. No franchise, no renewed interest, just silence. And that silence says everything. Because a story about the end of the world should feel urgent. It should feel desperate. It should make every moment count. Instead, The Ultimate Warrior feels like a world already forgotten, not destroyed, just abandoned. Number 7. A Boy and His Dog, 1975. The future here is not heroic. It is uncomfortable. It is ugly. And that is exactly why audiences rejected it. A Boy and His Dog drops us into a post-nuclear wasteland where survival has stripped humanity down to its most primal instincts. Food is scarce. Trust is non-existent. Morality feels like a forgotten concept. Chi, at the center of this world, is a young man and his telepathic dog, a partnership built not on loyalty alone, but on mutual need in a landscape that offers no mercy. From the very beginning, the tone feels confrontational. The film does not try to comfort the viewer. It does not soften its vision. Instead, it leans into harsh realities that many audiences were not ready to face. Violence feels casual. Relationships feel transactional. Even humor arrives in a way that feels unsettling rather than relieving. This is where the divide begins. Critics recognized the boldness of the concept. Some even praised its willingness to challenge expectations. But mainstream audiences reacted very differently. The film's cynical tone and controversial themes created distance. It was difficult to connect with characters who seemed shaped entirely by a broken world. The pacing adds to that discomfort. Instead of building traditional suspense, the story unfolds in a fragmented way. Moments feel abrupt. Transitions feel disjointed. The narrative seems less interested in guiding the viewer and more focused on presenting a series of harsh observations. Financially, the result was predictable. The film struggled to find an audience. Marketing could not easily communicate what made it unique. Was it satire? Was it horror? Was it a survival story? The lack of clarity worked against it. And yet, over time, something changed. Viewers began to revisit it, to see beyond the discomfort, to recognize its influence on later post-apocalyptic storytelling. But in 1975, none of that mattered. Because in that moment, A Boy and His Dog was not seen as ahead of its time. It was seen as too bleak to embrace. Number 6. The Black Hole, 1979. This was supposed to be the answer. Instead, it became the warning. The Black Hole was Disney's bold attempt to step into darker science fiction territory and compete directly with the massive success of Star Wars. The studio invested heavily. Visual effects were pushed to new limits. The tone shifted away from family-friendly storytelling toward something more ominous and mysterious. The premise feels powerful. A lost spaceship discovered near a black hole. A crew drawn into a situation that becomes increasingly dangerous and psychologically complex. The presence of a brilliant but unstable scientist adds tension that should drive the narrative forward. At first, the film delivers on its promise. The visuals are impressive. The scale feels grand. The sense of isolation in deep space creates a strong atmosphere. But as the story unfolds, cracks begin to appear. The tone becomes inconsistent. Moments of seriousness are interrupted by elements that feel out of place. Characters lack the depth needed to carry emotional weight. The narrative shifts direction without building momentum. Critics noticed immediately. Many praised the visual ambition but questioned the storytelling. The film seemed unsure of its identity. Was it a philosophical exploration of the unknown, or a space adventure designed for mass appeal? Audiences felt that uncertainty. The emotional connection never fully formed. The spectacle alone was not enough to sustain interest. Financially, the film did not collapse entirely, but it failed to meet expectations. Given its high budget and aggressive marketing, the returns were disappointing. The studio had hoped for a defining hit. Instead, they received a cautionary tale. And that is what makes it significant. Because The Black Hole shows what happens when ambition outpaces clarity, when visuals replace narrative, and when a studio reaches for greatness but forgets what made audiences care in the first place. Number 5. Phase 4, 1974. The threat here is not loud. It does not roar. It does not announce itself. And that is what makes it terrifying. Phase 4 presents a world where humanity is no longer at the top of the chain. Ants begin to evolve. Not gradually, not naturally, rapidly, intelligently, with purpose. What follows is not a war in the traditional sense, but a quiet takeover, driven by precision and collective behavior. The concept is chilling because it feels plausible. There is no alien invasion, no massive destruction, just a shift in balance that humans fail to understand until it is too late. The film builds tension through observation rather than action, through patterns rather than explosions. Visually, it is striking. Close-up photography transforms ordinary insects into something alien. Their movements feel coordinated, intentional, almost strategic. The desert setting adds to the isolation. There is nowhere to escape, nowhere to hide. But this is where the divide emerges. The film demands patience. It unfolds slowly. It prioritizes atmosphere over momentum. Dialogue is minimal. Explanations are limited. The audience is expected to interpret rather than be guided. For some, this approach feels immersive. For many, it feels distant. Critics were divided. A few praised its originality and visual style. Others found it too abstract and emotionally detached. Audiences struggled even more. The lack of traditional storytelling created a barrier. The tension never resolves in a way that satisfies expectation. At the box office, the result was clear. Limited engagement, weak returns. A film that failed to connect with a wide audience despite its unique premise. The studio did not push it further. No major revival, no aggressive promotion. It simply faded. And yet there is something haunting about it. Because Phase 4 does not fail due to lack of imagination, it fails because it asks the audience to meet it halfway. And most were not willing to take that step. Number 4, THX 1138, 1971. Before the galaxy far, far away, there was a world stripped of identity, and audiences were not ready for it. THX 1138, directed by George Lucas, presents a future where control is absolute. Emotions are suppressed. Names are replaced with numbers. Human connection is treated as a malfunction that must be corrected. From the very first scene, the film establishes a tone of cold precision. White environments stretch endlessly. Sound design creates a sense of emptiness that feels deliberate and oppressive. Everything is controlled. Everything is monitored. Freedom does not exist. The narrative follows a man who begins to break from this system, not through rebellion in the traditional sense, but through the simple act of feeling, of questioning, of wanting something beyond what is allowed. It is a powerful idea, a deeply philosophical exploration of conformity and control. But the execution is intentionally distant. Dialogue is minimal. Characters rarely express emotion in a way that feels familiar. The pacing moves in a way that prioritizes atmosphere over narrative clarity. The film does not explain itself. It expects the audience to interpret its meaning. Critics were divided but intrigued. Some recognized its ambition. Others felt it lacked accessibility. Audiences, however, reacted with confusion. The absence of traditional storytelling made it difficult to engage. Financially, the film struggled. It did not connect with mainstream viewers. The studio saw limited returns and quickly moved on. For George Lucas, it was a critical moment, a failure that forced a shift in approach. No lesson in balancing vision with audience connection, and that lesson would eventually lead to something much bigger. But in 1971, THX 1138 was not seen as the beginning of greatness. It was seen as a cold experiment that audiences quietly rejected. Number 3, Silent Running, 1972. This one does not collapse with noise. It fades with something far more unsettling: loneliness. Silent Running, directed by Douglas Trumbull, begins with a simple idea that carries unexpected emotional weight. Earth has lost its natural ecosystems. Forests no longer exist. Humanity has moved on. But somewhere in space, a small crew tends to the last remaining plant life preserved inside massive domes. At the center is a man who refuses to accept extinction. What follows is not a traditional science fiction adventure. It is a slow unraveling, a story driven by isolation and obsession. The tone is quiet, almost meditative. Dialogue is sparse. Silence becomes a character of its own. Visually, the film is beautiful. The contrast between sterile space and fragile nature creates a powerful image. The small robotic companions add a strange warmth to an otherwise cold environment. There are moments that feel deeply human despite the absence of human interaction. But that is also where it struggles. The pacing moves deliberately, too deliberately for many viewers. The lack of action creates distance. The emotional arc builds slowly, without clear release. Audiences expecting excitement found themselves drifting. Critics were divided. Some praised its message and visual storytelling. Others felt it lacked engagement. The film seemed caught between art and entertainment without fully committing to either. At the box office, it failed to find momentum. Marketing could not sell its quiet intensity. Word of mouth remained limited. The studio did not push for a wider audience, and so it disappeared. Yet over time, it began to resurface. Viewers started to recognize its emotional depth. Its environmental message felt ahead of its time. Its tone became its strength rather than its weakness. But in 1972, none of that mattered. Because in that moment, silent running was not seen as poetic. It was seen as too quiet to survive. Number 2. Damnation Alley, 1977. Timing can destroy even the strongest idea. Damnation Alley arrived with ambition and scale, a post-nuclear America filled with mutated threats. A dangerous journey across a shattered landscape. Vehicles built for survival, storms that feel alive. Everything about it suggests a high-stakes adventure. And then it made the worst possible mistake. It released alongside Star Wars. What should have been a major event instantly became invisible. But timing was not its only problem. The production itself was troubled. Mechanical failures delayed shooting. Effects did not perform as expected. Scenes had to be adjusted or abandoned. The final product reflects that struggle. Moments that should feel intense lose impact. The world feels inconsistent. The danger never fully materializes in a convincing way. The pacing becomes uneven. Action sequences arrive but fail to build sustained tension. Characters move from one situation to another without a strong emotional thread connecting them. The journey feels fragmented instead of cohesive. Critics were not impressed. Many pointed out its technical issues. Others noted that it lacked the excitement needed to compete in a rapidly evolving science fiction landscape. At the box office, the result was immediate. Audiences chose spectacle elsewhere. The film struggled to hold screens. Revenue dropped quickly. The studio had little choice but to move on, and that is the harsh reality. Because Damnation Alley did not fail because the idea was weak. It failed because everything around it was stronger, and in Hollywood, being second is often the same as being forgotten. Number 1. Zardoz, 1974. This is not just a failure. This is a film that confused its own existence. Zardoz, starring Sean Connery, was meant to be a bold philosophical statement about humanity, power, and immortality. Instead, it became one of the most baffling cinematic experiences of the decade. The world it presents is divided between the brutals and the eternals. One group lives in decay and violence. The other exists in a controlled paradise where death no longer applies. At the center of it all is a floating stone head that speaks like a god. It delivers weapons. It controls belief. It shapes reality. From the opening moments, the film demands acceptance of its strange logic, but it never provides a stable foundation for that logic to grow. Scenes unfold with symbolism that feels overwhelming rather than meaningful. Dialogue attempts to explain concepts that remain abstract and disconnected. Visually, the film is unforgettable. Costumes push beyond conventional design. Locations feel surreal. The atmosphere is thick with intention. But intention alone cannot carry a story when clarity disappears. Audiences reacted with confusion. Some laughed at moments meant to feel serious. Others simply disengaged. The tone shifts unpredictably between philosophical exploration and unintentional absurdity. Critics were equally divided but often harsh. Many questioned whether the film understood its own message. Others dismissed it entirely as indulgent and incoherent. At the box office, it failed to meet expectations. Interest dropped quickly. The studio did not attempt to reposition it. Promotion faded. The film was left to exist on the fringes. And yet, over time, something unusual happened. Zardoz did not disappear completely. It became a curiosity, a film people revisit not because it succeeded, but because it dared to be different in a way few films ever attempt. But in 1974, none of that mattered. Because in that moment, Zardoz was not seen as visionary. It was seen as a spectacular misfire Hollywood could not explain. Some films fail and disappear. Others fail and leave questions behind. These stories remind us that ambition alone is never enough. Execution decides everything. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like and subscribe because the next list dives even deeper into forgotten cinematic disasters you will not believe exist.